Hi, I'm Hazel. I'm a chiropractor, yoga and breathwork instructor, and today I'll be talking you through my version of hip hinge, sit to stand and squats, particularly for those that are suffering with low back pain. So what do I mean by those words? So essentially, when we live our life, often we have to move lower down to the ground and to come back up. This might be because we have to lift an object either lower down or from the ground. Particularly common if you have children. We have to sit down, we have to stand up. That's what we would call an ADL, an activity of daily living. But also being able to functionally move our spine in an effective way to lean forward is going to avoid future injury. And particularly for those with low back pain, we need to know how to do this safely. And what I mean by that is not putting undue stress and strain on the muscular, fascial, ligamental structures and joints in the low back that possibly could already be inflamed or already have some sort of irritation. So to start with, we have to learn the fundamental principle of being able to hip hinge. And that means to move from the hips rather than moving from the lower back. And I'll demonstrate what that looks like. Hey there. So you're going to have your feet hip width apart with some softness in the knees. And when you start to lean forward, you'll try and pivot from, when I say hip, I mean this position here, rather than breaking the joints of the low back. So it essentially looks like this. I'll cross my arms here so it keeps it clear. So my hips are swaying backwards and I'm leaning forward. And I'm trying to keep a neutral spine, a neutral back. So for example, if I was more rounded, it would look like this. If I was more flexed. If I was more extended, it would look like that. And then we're trying to find the neutral position, which is like this. So there's a little bit of tone in my belly. I'm holding my belly very slightly to activate the core, those deep muscles. And what I'm not trying to do, essentially, is come out of pelvic neutral as I lean forward. Those that may play golf may find this position familiar when you go in for a shot. Also, it's not dissimilar to a deadlift position where you may come and slide the bar down towards your knees. So both of those are similar sort of postures. When you have sort of embedded that hip hinge into your brain, wanting attention, you can then progress and add on into a sit to stand posture, which I'll now show you. So just using a chair, I'm now going to hip hinge and then I add in a squat. So I'm then going to sit down and then I'm going to come up to a neutral spine. Then reverse this to stand up. I'm going to hip hinge forward, take the weight into my feet and then stand up. So common mistakes with this one are to be too rounded. So if you're more flexed, it would look like this, coming down, coming forwards, or again to be too extended where you overarch the low back and then as you come forward again, you're arching through the low back. So both of those extreme versions will put more pressure on the low back, which is obviously not good if you're in pain. The lower the chair, the more challenging. So to start with, you could practice this with a higher chair. And it will feel quite rigid and difficult to begin. But once this becomes a bit more natural, it just looks a bit more like this. So it's not necessarily too formulaic. But what you really do want to do is make sure you're feeling the effort in the thighs, the glutes and the core, and you don't want to feel the effort in the large muscles of your low back. Next stage after that is to just practice a squat without the chair to land on. What you would do then is maybe take your feet slightly wider, have the feet slightly turned out. For now I'll just pop my hands up here. And start to tip from your hips, so it's exactly the same start position, the hip hinge. But now we don't have the chair there, so we're going to stay slightly more length forwards, but we're trying to find this neutral back and this neutral spine. which I know is slightly different from maybe some other strengthening squat exercises, but from a rehab perspective, this is what we're aiming for. I've got my head in neutral, slight activation in the core, and then hip hinging back up into neutral. Really important with the knees to not let the knees buckle inwards. So we're spreading and rooting down our feet. And as we come down, we hip hinge, and the knees are spreading out over the toes. So for example, we don't want the knees to buckle inwards. We're almost imagining we're pushing the knees outwards into an imaginary resistance here. And for this purpose, we're keeping our head in neutral, like so. Just to demonstrate the common problems. Not adequate core activation will mean that we'll start with an anterior tilt, and then as you come down, we've got too much curve in the low back. And then the other issue is a slight posterior tilt where we're starting rounded, and then we're squatting down with a rounded spine and coming back up. And last but not least, we can apply those postures into being able to lift. So if we try that just simply with this chair, wherever you want to lift, you want to be as close to the object as possible. Get a good firm rooted base, and you're essentially doing your squat again. So tipping from the hips, coming down, trying to get as underneath the object as possible. Taking hold, drawing it in towards you, standing up, and then reversing this to come back down. I'm hip hinging, I'm squatting, placing the object down, and then standing back up. And of course, starting to practice that with a light object, and then you could build heavier, particularly if your job involves a lot of this sort of thing. Really common injuries are repetitive lifting of light loads, where you don't take the effort to properly get into a safe lifting posture. So certainly something to think about in your activities of daily living. What do you do a lot of? And think about those different postures and how you could apply them to your life to see how you could firstly help any existing back pain problems, but what we really want to do is prevent further reoccurrence of back pain. Thank you.